Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm here to do the third and final video on my in-depth conversation series with Sarah from Hardcover Hearts about The Years by Annie Ernaux. If you have not watched the previous two videos in this series, I suggest you head to the show notes right now. There you'll find links to both the first video that I made and the second video made by Sarah from Hardcover Hearts. But if you have already watched the first two videos and want to conclude the series, then watch on! So in her video, Sarah asked me a series of very insightful and smart questions about my thoughts on The Years by Annie Ernaux. I have them all here on my phone, so I'm going to start answering them right now. So let's get to the first question. Annie goes incredibly intimate in her descriptions of her body, sex, etc. How was that to read as a man? Personally, no problem at all, and I think that has to do with my background when it comes to books. You know, unlike a lot of men out there, I'm not going to say most men or anything like that, but a lot of men, seem to have trouble reading books or approaching books written by women. That surprises me, but time and time again, I've come across men who think like that and would never take a book written by a woman seriously unless it was about something they cared about. So a book like this, like The Years, that deals with domesticity, growing up, discovering female sexuality, all those kinds of things would put off a lot of guys, I think. Not reading it, but I mean, they would be put off even to the extent that they might not even pick up the book and give it a chance. That's not the case with me. I don't want to give myself any medals here or anything like that, but I think it has to do with my background, my personal background, which is neither here nor there. I mean, I'm not gonna talk about it on a video. I've always been very close to women in my family, more than men actually, but I don't think that's what makes the difference to me. The difference is that from college, I always took courses on women's writers. If there was something offered that had female, I would gravitate towards it because I was endlessly fascinated and I wanted to know more, So I remember doing a course in college, doing this class, which was about writers, women novelists in the English-speaking world. And then I did the same thing with poetry, and I'm sure, I took other options that were similar to this. So I'm kind of used to reading things like The Years. This wasn't a surprise for me, this kind of frank narrative that kind of lived in female experience in writing. It's not alien to me, so I had no problems with it whatsoever, and in fact I appreciated it a lot. Here's the second question. How did Annie Ernaux come on your radar? I'm sure a lot of you know that I really like the work of Edouard Louis, the French writer, young French writer. He's a writer I discovered a couple of years ago. I've talked about his books in recent videos, and I think I even talked about it in the first video in this series. So that's how she came to my attention. He was promoting one of his books. I think he was promoting History of Violence on French television, and he mentioned Annie Ernaux, and since then I've heard him mention her and praise her a lot in a lot of interviews. Even when he's promoting his books, he talks a lot about her, and because I liked him and I liked his writing, I thought, she might be an author that I would like. So that's what put her on the radar, and that's when Sarah and I were discussing this project, I suggested this book as an option for us to do as an in-depth discussion, and it turns out that she also wanted to do it because the book has been translated into English and it has received, it has been highly acclaimed in America particularly, so she was interested. So I just jumped to the opportunity. But yeah, she first came on my radar thanks to Edouard Louis. There was a second part to that question that I didn't read, which is, were you familiar with previous work of hers? And I wasn't. This is the first book of hers that I've read. Then Sarah asks, how did you feel about the changing lenses of personal to universal that occurred? I thought that was masterfully. If you've read this book, and I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, if you've made it this far into this discussion, it's because you have read the book. You would have noticed that she starts talking very specifically about her as a child, and then as she grows older and older, she widens her lens and talks about women and talks about society, French society at large. And to me, that worked so well. I didn't even notice. It was so subtly done, and it was just fantastic. Sarah then asks, were there any specific passages that left a mark? What and why? And yeah, I do have two passages that are very different, so I want to introduce each one of them. The first one, it's about politics. It's all about politics, although not party politics, but politics at large and sociology. And that's something that I was expecting, being an Edouard Louis fan and knowing the kind of thing that he writes, and because he admires Annie Ernaux so much, I kind of expected this to be part of her work and part of the years particularly, and it was. And I could have chosen a number of different passages to illustrate this, but I've chosen this one. It was a sweet and happy dictatorship that no one contested. One needed only protect oneself from its excesses. Educate the consumer, the primary definition of the individual, for everyone, including illegal immigrants cramped into boats off the Spanish coast. The shopping center were the face of freedom, along with a hypermarket crumbling beneath its mountains of merchandise. It was normal for goods to arrive from all over the world and freely circulate, while men and women were turned away at the borders. To cross them, some had themselves locked into trucks, inert merchandise, and died asphyxiated when the driver forgot them in a Dover parking lot under the June sun. And even though she stops the narration in 2006, I think a lot of the passage that I've just read is relevant to us today, and not just in France or in the European Union, but also in the States, in Canada, in Australia, and in so many other countries. The second passage that I want to highlight is one in which she talks about French intellectualism, and that was something that I also expected in this book, and I relished it. I think nothing could illustrate Lee better than the following passage. In lecture halls, professors in neckties explained writers' works by way of their biographies. They said Monsieur André Malraux and Madame Yourcenar out of respect for the living persons, and had us study dead authors only. We didn't dare quote Freud, fearing sarcasm and bad marks. We barely even mentioned Bachelard and Studies in Human Time by Georges Poulet, believed we showed great independence of mind by declaring at the start of a presentation, labels must be rejected, or Sentimental Education was the first modern novel. Friends gave each other books as gifts and wrote dedications on the flyleaves. It was a time of Kafka, Dostoevsky, Virginia Woolf, and Lawrence Durrell. We discovered the nouveau roman of Butor, Robbe-Grillet, Soler, and Serrote, which we wanted to like, but it didn't offer us enough help with our lives. I still have a few more questions from Sarah, so let's get going. The next one is, the feminism is so clear and specific in this book. Do you tend to read books on feminism? Did you feel that you gleaned any new insights on French women's feminist evolution, or more universally? Okay, so those are the other questions that Sarah asked me. There's just one final question left, so I've just grouped them all together because I think they're pointing at the same thing, right? And yeah, I consider myself a feminist, or an ally of feminism in any case. I am aware of it. I've studied it in college. I've known a lot of feminists. Like I said, I consider myself a feminist, but that kind of sounds a little bit crude. Like, I feel like other people, women, should tell me if they think I'm a feminist. Saying that I'm a feminist sounds kind of presumptuous to me, anyway. But yeah, I have read books on feminism, both theoretically and practically, fiction, And so yeah, I've read novels, feminist novels, short stories, that kind of thing. I'm endlessly fascinated by them and by that kind of writing. I don't want to go into the books that I've read because I'm probably going to miss out on some big ones, but I'm interested and I always want to read more. Yeah, feminism, of course, has a lot of very different branches and, spreads out, and it has evolved a lot, not just in France, as we see in this book, but also, in the States, in the UK, in other parts of Europe, etc., in other parts of the world. Of course, you have fascinating feminist movements in developing countries as well. There's so much that I would never claim to be an expert on it. It's just one of my interests, but it's not the thing that I'm the most focused on. So, I'm just gonna kind of leave it there in terms of, do I read books on feminism? Yes, I do. And did I glean any new insights on French women's feminist evolution? I really didn't. I think the French feminist evolution is very similar to the feminist evolution that I've seen happening around me. So no, I didn't really discover much in terms of that reading this book. But I think for people who live in other countries, maybe they will. I don't want to be presumptuous enough, maybe they know even better than I do. But yeah, I personally didn't, but I think there's a lot to learn from this book. And more universally, yeah, it's the same thing. Ernaux was already preaching to the choir, I think, and I think that's true also of Sarah, right? And she'll correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below. And then the final question that Sarah asked me is, what is my verdict? Okay, well, my verdict is that I absolutely loved this book. It was one of the best books I read in 2019. I actually read this book in 2019. And I didn't put it on my list of the best books of the year just because I knew that I was going to be doing this with Sarah early in 2020, so I didn't want to spoil anything. But you can consider this one of the best books I read last year in 2019. In fact, I love this book so much that I want to go on and read more by Ernaux. So if you have read other books by Ernaux, I'm not talking to Sarah here, I'm talking to everyone watching this video. If you've read any other books by Ernaux that you'd recommend, please, let's talk about it, because I'd love to read more by her. That's how much I love this book. So this is all from me. This is the end now of our in-depth conversation about the years by Ernaux. Please subscribe if you've liked what you've seen. Please leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to talk about books in the comment section. That's one of my favorite things about having my channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.